Yeah, this was a very special kind of reactor, and for a couple of reasons. One is the fuel recycle technology. Another one was the passive safety, and all of this had been demonstrated at Experimental Breeder Reactor number two, EBR2, in Idaho over 30 years. Back then, it was only 20 years, and then EBR2 was built as a prototype power plant to show that you could build an integrated power plant that would work. Obviously, it wasn't economically optimized, but it worked very well. And there were fuel issues early on that were solved. Like any technology, you build it and you say, well, what are the shortcomings here? What can we make better and more efficient or safer or whatever? U.S. airline industry is a great example of this, where
Hmm.
they have learned by doing. And I think I read a statistic somewhere that the fatality rate per airline takeoff or the crash rate per airline takeoff has dropped by a factor of 10,000 over 60 years.
It's truly amazing. I mean, I remember back in the '60s, it seemed like there was a huge crash every month,
Yes.
and now we never really hear about them.
Yeah, it's a rare occurrence.
Rare occurrence. Um, so just to step into the technical side just for a moment, if I'm not mistaken, was it adding zirconium to the combination of uranium and plutonium metal that kind of opened whole new possibilities in terms of passive safety?
That was a key innovation for the performance of the fuel, actually.
Oh,
Initially, the fuel was very it performed very poorly. The fission product swelling was such that the cladding would be damaged after only basically 20% of where you wanted to be in terms of extracting the energy. So they had to keep taking the fuel out and getting some of the fission products out there, the ones that cause swelling, which were the fission gases, and then reconstitute the fuel and put it back in the reactor. That was sort of the precursor of the modern fuel recycle technology, pyroprocessing. That's the core of the IFR fuel cycle. So they made a couple of innovations in the fuel. It put a fission gas plenum at the top, so when this gas would percolate out of the metal fuel, which it could do because metal is weaker than oxide, it would basically collect up at the top in this plenum and not increase the pressure. Because if you have a very small volume and add a little bit of gas, the pressure goes up a lot. If you have a big volume, then you add the same amount of gas, it doesn't go up much. So the pressure on the cladding was dropped. Also, the fuel was made a little bit smaller, so there was a gap between the fuel and the cladding. So when it swelled, by the time it touched the cladding, it was fairly weak mechanically and was unable to damage the cladding in any important way. And but to make up for that, another innovation was to put some liquid metal sodium inside the fuel, new fuel, when you assemble it,
hmm.
to make sure at the beginning, when there's a big gap between the fuel and the cladding, that the heat is transferred across that gap very efficiently.
Hmm.
That keeps the fuel temperature low. And metal fuel has a much higher thermal conductivity than oxide fuel, so the temperatures are generally lower. The melting temperature is also lower.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting.
in terms of technology, it's kind of a trade-off between melting temperature and fuel temperature.
Uh-huh.
So those were the innovations, and so that involved, it wasn't called recycling, it was melt refining is what it was called. So I just took the fuel meat out and melted it, and the gases came out of the molten fuel, and they froze it and put it back in the reactor.
Oh, okay. Okay. Later on, I'd like to touch on the recycling. I've never been completely clear on where pyroprocessing and electro-refining, how those two processes work together. But if you want to touch on that now, we could do that too.
Actually, I don't know what the distinction is. I can certainly consider them one and the same.
Oh, really? Okay.
I guess electrorefining is probably a step in the pyroprocessing. That would be my guess, but it's just a guess. So,
I see. Okay. All right. Are there any particular anecdotes during the development process that you'd like to share?
um, a lot of it was what I heard going to these design review meetings with the commercial vendors about oxide fuel reactors and the extreme levels of analysis and design they had to go through to ensure the safety of an oxide fueled fast reactor.
Mm.
And just was strikingly obvious to most of us at Argonne at the time. So that was when Argonne figured out the wonderful safety characteristics of metal fuel in a sodium-cooled fast reactor. That was just like a huge relief.
Yeah, solved a lot of problems, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, at one point, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that by 1994, the IFR was ready for prime time. Did you have any inkling that funding would be cut, or did it come as a complete surprise?
Um, we certainly feared that. And so I'm not going to get into politics here, but the strategic problem that nuclear's had for a long time, and it's not necessarily true today, was that Democrats didn't look favorably on anything that had the word nuclear in it, and Republicans didn't want to pay for big government programs. So, kind of a bad strategic place to be in.
Yeah, yeah,
And obviously, with recent geopolitical developments, there's been a serious reevaluation of both of those stances. But what was the question again?
I was asking about, you said it was ready for prime time, and I just didn't.
Yeah, the big thing was the shutdown heat removal tests in 1986. Um,
Oh
and
yes, the video of that is
so
amazing.
that was sort of the voila, you know. You tell the operators to destroy the reactor, they try and they fail.
Right.
Um, I just think it has a real elegance to it. And what I'm about to say is not something I actually have advocated to anybody, but when you license a water-cooled reactor, you have a bunch of guys like me do all the safety analysis and all the other analysis, and we write a stack of books that's 12 feet long or 20 feet long. Anyway, it's an enormous undertaking. Every bit of computer input is, of course, correct. There are no errors in that. The nuclear data is all perfect, and our analytical models describe perfectly how this is all going to work. And I got to convince the regulators of that. And so we do that. But here's a kind of a reactor where if you tried to test an accident on a water-cooled reactor, let's say the pumps fail, you actually have the accident. And maybe the fuel doesn't fail, but it doesn't fail because it depends on a whole lot of stuff to work. And, we've been very successful at that. It's a good technology. What I'm saying here, it shouldn't be taken as a ding on water cooled reactors. But in EBR2, we conducted the accident. Take the reactor to 100% power, gag the system that tells the control rods to fall in if there aren't any pumps running, cooling water pump, not cooling sodium pumps running, and then turn off the cooling pumps. And of course, this is a great opportunity for the laboratory. Obviously, the laboratory wasn't stupid. We did a whole lot of analysis leading up to this, so we knew it was going to work. We did some low power tests, so we did this with pretty much complete confidence. But on the day of the tests, we brought in a bunch of VIPs and people who might be interested in leading the charge for funding further development of this technology. And we put them right behind the operators. This comes out of a Chuck Till video.
Yeah, I saw that.
And so when the operators turned off the cooling pumps, some of the VIPs turned around to make sure the Argonne managers were still in the room, which they were. They had the confidence. But to me, now, if you think about it, we could license a reactor instead of a bunch of guys like me writing these big reports after all kinds of very expensive analysis. You can conduct the accident, and your argument instead of 12 to 20 feet thick books is, see,
Yeah, yeah.
nothing happens.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And there's an elegance to that that I think um, it's not just comparative safety. I think it's kind of a beautiful thing if you can design something and build it that actively resists failure without operators, without automatic systems and circuits and sensors and all that stuff.
Right, right. And just the physics of it safeguards you.
Yeah.
Um, I've read one of the probabilistic risk assessments for Diablo Canyon, and it's something like 590 pages, and I read the whole thing, and I know the core damage frequency, and you can quote these statistics that the chance of one reactor at Diablo Canyon having an accident that is capable of harming the public is something like one every 14,000 reactor years. And you can cite those statistics all you want, but people see that big thick book and they think, what are they trying to hide or whatever? It's a very kind of a weird situation with convincing people of nuclear safety. But I agree, the simpler the better, by far,
And the more natural.
and the more natural, right? Um, By the way, when we were doing our policy work with Diablo Canyon Power Plant, we've become acutely aware of the influence wielded by the natural gas industry. They oppose relicensing, and there's obviously financial reasons why. Were you aware of any other similar influence at work in 1994?
Not specifically with respect to industries, but um, these days, or let's say in the last 10 years, the largest environmental organizations in the world, which have been, at least until now, uniformly, vehemently anti-nuclear, their combined budgets were on the order of multiple billions of dollars. I've heard numbers ranging from $2 to $4 billion per year.
Hmm.
And the pro-nuclear organizations, well, there's an industry one, but if you add up all their budgets, it's tens of millions. And so there's been a massive PR campaign. It's been going on for decades against this. Now, where that money comes from, I don't know. Um, but it wouldn't shock me if it comes from places that feel they have a specific economic or even strategic interest in us not developing nuclear power. About 30 or 40 years ago, The Economist magazine did a study of NGOs, and one of them was, I think, Greenpeace. Okay. So what is the business model of Greenpeace? And The Economist concluded it wasn't environmentalism, it was fundraising.
Hmm.
And so that Greenpeace has been very skillful at producing stunts that would force people that actually have to produce something to behave in ways that look bad or, seem objectionable. Um, and so that's sort of how some of these organizations work, maybe most of them. I certainly get a lot of appeals from them. It's all about this and that, and it's all about fear or anger.
You mean appeals just in terms of information or
Well, information and that information is always useful in fundraising.
or misinformation?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I used the wrong term. Yeah.